Thank you for joining us, Shark's Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. Have you ever been to a conference where the host was a pleasant but boring speaker? Or have you been to one where the MC themselves was a professional comic who could entertain the crowd? And did their comic bit make you reflect on your own content so much that you looked at how much humor you've injected into your own marketing? Mike Albanese is a stand up comedian, an actor, and the MC and host to many of the Digital Summit marketing conferences throughout the country, and he's a subject matter expert at funny content. And on this episode, we'll discuss when and if to be funny with your marketing, context, social media, Kmart, KFC, Wendy's, and thousands of laughs. So let's tune in to a funny MC with a stand up shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Mike, thank you so much for joining us on A Shark's Perspective today. Please tell us a little bit about your background and your comic journey thus far.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, thanks for having me, first of all. And it's kind of a fun meets tragedy of my own.
Yeah,
I don't necessarily believe that comedy has to equal tragedy plus time, but it's, I was in a position about 10 or so years ago where I left my career behind of sales and marketing that I just wasn't happy in, and with a company that stole a lot of money from me
that's
and
nice.
ended a long-term relationship that almost resulted in marriage, and was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I had a friend of mine who was doing comedy since high school, and he had gotten to the point where he was headlining, and he needed help getting to and from gigs because he had a couple of run-ins with uh, driving at inappropriate moments. So much so
Sure.
they took his license, and so he needed help. And he knew that I didn't have anything going on at the moment. And he said, "Do you want to be my manager?" And I said, "I'll do you one better. I'll do all the stuff you want me to do, but you got to let me open for you and do just a couple minutes." And he was all about it. And so we kind of hit the road for a couple of years doing that. And then I just kind of never stopped.
That's fantastic. Well, for setup for the audience, the Digital Marketing Summit series goes to what 20-ish cities and venues a year and has anywhere from I don't know, probably 700 to 3,000 per show. And Mike's the MC for the conference and introduces keynotes and all the big kahunas, maybe some of the little kahunas too. And I guess my question is then, how did a comic become the MC for a series of digital marketing conferences and hit what? I mean, what are you hitting? Probably 30 to 50,000 people a year in the last couple of years. I mean, aren't you supposed to be a generic, boring marketer who gets up there and self promotes themselves or their agency and then introduces us and puts us to sleep? I mean, did you approach the summit folks? They, you?
Well,
How did,
no.
how did that all happen?
So that's why I think that these summits are actually a lot better than a lot of them.
Oh, yeah.
They started a couple years ago. I'm a little foggy on the details, but I think somebody that was used to be one of their bookers that brought in speakers saw
Mm-hmm.
me or heard about me when they were in Atlanta, when I was living in Atlanta, and then they just asked if I wanted to host this event, and I had never done one of that magnitude because it was one of their bigger events, a couple thousand people, and I was like, sure, why not? Let's give it a shot. And my job was just going to be to bring people on and off all day, which is pretty easy. And I think
Sure.
that the comedian should be the MC for every event. I don't think, because comics have a better perspective and capability of handling whatever comes their way because we've
Agreed.
seen it all. Um, and at this particular event, Steve Wozniak was the main
Yeah.
get.
Yeah.
And at the last minute, we found out he wasn't going to come because his flights were being grounded in London, so there was no chance he was going to make it. So they were scrambling to find a replacement, and they happened to have Susan Bennett in the house, who is the voice of Siri,
Mm-hmm.
as one of the guests. And so they just kind of asked me, "Hey, maybe you could like do an interview or something with her." I was like, "Cool, I'll put something together." And so me and Susan I talked to her, and I came up with a bunch of really stupid, ridiculous questions to ask her.
Right.
like a half hour notice, and then we went on the main stage in front of several thousand people, and I interviewed her for about 20 or so minutes, and it killed. It did really well,
Yeah.
thankfully. It gone one of two ways, but it did really well, and it got a ton of great feedback. And then I think from there they found out that I could do more than just MC, and I could also think on my feet, and I'm a team player. And they just kind of kept adding cities and asking me if I wanted to come to more and more cities. And then now I'm pretty much doing all of I would say about 90% of all of their events.
Mm-hmm. Well, by the way, kudos to the folks at Digital Summit because it's proven to be a very smart choice. And I know out of the last dozen or so conferences I've been to, I'm trying to think of one time that I actually laughed, unless I was sitting out in the hall, people watching and making fun of some. But Mike, there were a few reasons I wanted to talk to you on here. Any man who's used a T-shirt cannon to launch shirts into a crowd of marketing peeps is naturally okay with me. And after your performance at those marketing conferences when people openly tweet that you almost made them pee in their pants, I guess that's obviously a pretty strong compliment as well. I saw where you posted that.
I get a lot of interesting feedback
Oh,
and
I
comments
bet.
on Twitter and Instagram, so it's been fun.
Well, as someone who's tried this before, what you do is stand-up comedy, and I'm a failed stand-up. I have the utmost respect for what you do, and I it's like if you ever watch America's Got Talent and a good comedian comes out, then you see how much Howie Mandel, who's played a lot of clubs, obviously in his lifetime, you see the respect he gives because he knows how complex being a comedian is, let alone somebody who can get up and truly make people laugh, but really own the room, And it's hard enough to have the, maturity level of a 7-year-old like me, let alone do this for a living and do it well, like I've seen you do in front of several different groups. Who are the comics that make you laugh?
Well, let me ask you. Well, when you say you're a failed stand-up comic, what does that mean?
I did a few clubs a few years back, and I would say that it probably you could have called them, an alternative to Ambien, but I did a few and I could always get up and perform, but I just didn't have the material. I did not devote enough time to writing good content. I just got up there to act silly, and that's a recipe for failure.
Yeah, it's definitely a commitment. You gotta
Agreed.
hand your life over to it.
Well, who are the comics that make you laugh?
I mean, there's classics. There's some that people, the majority of people haven't heard of,
Oh yeah.
and there's. I'm a huge fan of Sebastian Maniscalco, and to a lot of people he's newer, but he's been around for a very long time,
Mm-hmm.
and his style and performance and his physicality, I think, is really pretty incredible. And I just read his book, and it's phenomenal. If you haven't read it, it's called "I'm Starving," which is great.
Yeah.
Brian Regan's incredible too. So ironically, because I'm not always clean as a comedian, but I really enjoy clean comedy. But not clean like Christian clean. I like
You're not Lenny Bruce.
not necessarily filthy. Although I do love filthy comedy. I find myself more apt to really enjoying comedy that's not necessarily dirty.
True. So at these marketing summits, who are some of the big names, the celebrity marketers on top of that you've met and introduced that you've kind of grown to like? I know you mentioned Steve Wozniak and the Siri lady, or at least Wozniak was supposed to come. But I mean, Digital Summits had so many big names. Chelsea Handler must have been a great one for you to meet.
Wozniak did actually make it to a couple, and I got to meet him and like interact with him, and he's an interesting guy.
Oh, I bet.
No, he just kind of. He's one of these guys. I've interviewed him before, like on like a main stage type of thing. He's one of the ones where you have to stop him to move on to the next question. He'll just spend the entire time answering one question. But I mean, the guy's a genius.
Yeah.
He's the mind behind the biggest company that we know. So, another really cool one was Mark Cuban. That was a really fun one. I was shocked at how little fanfare that guy walks around with. A lot of times, in a lot of situations where I've been around a big name, or I mean, Mark, you couldn't find a bigger name as far as like business or marketing development than Mark Cuban.
No kidding.
And his he parked himself in the main parking lot, walked in by himself in the front door, and was just kind of hanging out like the main lobby, waiting to for his time to go on. Like without he didn't have people with him or like a publicist. He just kind of just hanging out, drinking a diet coke, which I thought was really cool to see.
No
Just
kidding.
like this big headed monster.
Do you remember what he was driving?
No, I didn't see him pull in,
Oh,
but
okay.
he came in with a ticket. Like
Yeah.
he had a ticket. He goes, "Hey, is it cool if I'm parked over here?" We're like, "What are you
Yeah.
talking about?" And people didn't even know, didn't realize it was him because I think people were so taken back at the idea that he would just be walking in the front door that people just didn't think it was him.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Who are the non-billionaires that you've liked? You just named off two big ones.
My roommates, they're pretty cool,
Yeah.
pretty unrich, which is nice. Um, a lot of the people that I interact with as far as that, like speakers, they're all pretty successful. Um, I really like I really like Morgan Spurlock. Al Madrigal was really cool to hang out with. I'm friends with him, and he was really cool to work with. We did several shows together. Chelsea Handler did a couple of digital summits,
What
and that
about
was a lot of
Scott
fun.
Dickers?
Scott Dickers is great.
He's
Scott Dickers
awesome.
is he's super funny and he's super weird.
Very
With that,
humble.
yeah, and he's just a strange guy, and that's my kind of guy.
Yeah.
That's my kind of person, you know. And he's done a lot of the digital summits, and I think he still has more coming up. So if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. To anyone who's listening.
Well, and Seth Godin's back, and he's a interesting individual and he's very funny on stage. It's part of his shtick.
Yeah, I like Seth a lot. He's also super weird, which I like. And Anne Hanley, I liked her style. She's got a lot of really cool things to say, and a lot of great material, and it's constantly evolving as well, which is with her, which is nice to see. You know, she's growing as you know. I mean, digital marketing is uh, in its infantile state right now, as far as like historic referencing and things like that. So to see it, people evolve with it is pretty cool.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about comedy and ads as well, and in marketing. You know, one of my favorite ads that really always sort of made me laugh, and I think you were the one that showed this at one of the summits, was the Kmart "Oops, I Shit My Pants" ad. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, shipped my
Shipped
pants.
my pants. So that was a bold ad for a relatively pretty boring brand. You know, anyone listening can go Google that. Obviously, there's been a lot of brands who've injected humor or at least tried to do it. And if you look at KFC, they're obviously trying to do some more memorable things, like with Reba McEntire dressed up as the Colonel. But do you think ads like those work, where they're heavy in humor or satire, and why or why not?
I think it depends on your audience, you know, and depends on who you're trying to talk to.
Great point.
It's interesting that the behind the scenes part of that Kmart ad was that it 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 was so popular that they actually weren't prepared for the infrastructure as on their web,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't. Everything fell apart on the back end. They couldn't fix it in time to capture the people that would have shopped there. Um, so people saw the ad and the website started exploding, and they just weren't prepared for it, and it shut itself down.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually lost on that one in the short term. They came back a little bit because they did another ad when because they have gas stations in some of their Kmart's, and they did like the exact same thought process with their big gas discounts. But when you say it quickly, it sounds like big ass discounts
Mm-hmm.
or big ass prices and big ass savings, like kind of that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, which was an interesting. It wasn't as popular as the first one, but it was kind of the same model. Um, so it worked enough. But my other thing with that program and with anyone trying to create, is that just assess your risk to the potential reward. And with the Kmart thing, it's what's the risk? Most people don't even know Kmart's exist anymore. So if you piss
Exactly.
them off, if you piss them off, who cares?
Exactly.
You weren't shopping there anyway, so there's only upside really with that. So it's always a risk versus reward scenario when it comes to how far you want to take it and how far you want to draw the line.
Well, when you think from a comedian's perspective about putting humor in for a brand, I talk a lot of times about context and when, if you walk into a comedy club, you expect to hear funny things. If you walk into a serious brand's social media, you're not going to expect comedy. And a lot of times I see a lot of marketers sort of fail with humorous content when they don't have in the right context. Have you seen that? For you, does it depend on the context or association of being in the right place for people to think it's funny? And I don't know if that necessarily would even really apply to a comedian within a club, but do you sort of look at context at all as a comedian?
Yeah, you have to. Everything is about context because if you don't, I mean, that's a big problem right now in comedy. Is that at least from as far as stand-up specifically goes, is that people will take a quote from a comedian on stage
Mm-hmm.
and they'll take one line and try to ruin somebody's career when they don't hear the entirety of what the statement was. So anything taken out of context can be dangerous, even if it's not comedy. So I think it's just really about, again, creating your own position of how far you're willing to take it, where you assess your own risk, and then where you see the potential upside to it. So I've seen people try to do comedy stuff, and it's funny in its own right, but if it doesn't make sense or to the context, there was this guy I can't remember his name, but we worked a little bit together. He has like a digital music platform he was trying to pursue, and he wanted to pull each individual hair out of his face for some reason. He thought
All
he
right.
could do it,
Yeah.
and then trying to make that funny and try to like make that a piece of content for his digital music platform. And I was just like, it's a funny idea, like the idea of you fast motion pulling every hair out of your face, but I don't know how that relates to the music service. And he couldn't really explain it to me, and then he did it, and it was cool to watch, but I have no idea how you would convert customers to your platform by pulling hair out of your face.
No kidding.
So you know, uh, a funny idea without proper lines or context is just going to fall on deaf ears.
Well, if you think about being in the right place at the right time, especially when you look at the marketing conferences, why do you think so many people find your material so funny when you're there?
Me specifically?
Yeah, I mean, why do you think a bunch of marketers who typically go to conferences that are pretty dry and boring with those normal boring introductory speakers, why do you think it resonates so well? I mean, I've seen a couple of years with you. Why do you think this room full of 2,500 marketers are laughing so much?
Well, I think it's a lot to do with the fact that I speak directly to them.
Yeah,
I'm not just showing up and doing like a pre-planned or
right.
like generic stand-up comedy bit. I change it constantly, and I'm evolving with time and creating specific bits for them. And I'm also telling them, I feel like it should be more of a conversation or feel like a conversation rather than just me up there spitting out jokes and then saying goodbye.
Yeah, you're not the opening for Jimmy Fallon they don't show on the air.
Right, right. I'm trying to create a, customized program, but then also actually saying what you're about to see is intended to be funny. So loosen the fuck up and
Yeah,
well, let's try to get a laugh because I know you're half asleep.
yeah.
I think when you create that context, like as another example, I have a bit that I do in my act sometimes. I had minor heart surgery a couple years ago, and it's a long story. And if I don't, I learned that if I don't tell people before I start the story that at the end of the story I'm gonna live and I'm fine, it doesn't. The story is not as funny until the end. But once I tell them everything's gonna be okay, this has a happy ending, they can laugh throughout the whole
Hmm.
story because they're at ease. So it's really about just putting people at ease and create and being in control of the tension that I want in the room.
Well, and it really helps to have the killer material you've had as well. So, kudos
Okay.
to you.
Yeah,
So,
and that takes a lot of work. It's not, but it's what I do. So I can't. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Oh, I bet. Well, so at one of the summits earlier in the year,
All right,
I
ten
saw you
thousand dollars. I'll trade it for 10 grand.
for yeah, exactly. At one of the summits earlier in the year, I saw you fill in for somebody I know that's who's a well-known, well-respected author, marketer. I won't call him out here. He's a good guy, good speaker, but you filled in and did a whole set on Wendy's social media and their Twitter battles, battles in air quotes. You killed it. I'm sure you've done this many times throughout the year, but the audience loved it. They loved the tweets you were showing, the delivery as if you'd written a whole show on these tweets. I mean, as a comic, these must make you laugh as well, but for a bunch of marketers out there, the group that you're speaking to, what value do you see in approaching social, especially Twitter, and how Wendy's has done it with some levity and humor?
Well, I mean, I think if you as a brand don't take your social media as serious as you do your, legal jargon,
Mm-hmm.
then you're gonna win. It's social media. It's not.
Exactly.
If you don't take it seriously, uh, the people listening won't take it seriously, and so you can get away with a little bit more. I mean, you have to take it seriously to an extent, but if you're goofing off and having fun and clearly making a joke, then if someone gets mad at you, then they look stupid.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not being directly mean towards somebody, then who cares? It's social media. It's stupid. All of it's not going to last, and why not have a good time with it and try to have fun and make some money?
Couldn't agree more. So, with humor, what advice do you give? The thousands of marketers that are going to listen to this show, or that go to the thousands that go to any one of the digital summits or any other. But when they start looking at how to use humor and comedy, what advice do you give them on how to inject that into their brand and their messaging?
They can email me at
Where do they
info@info@head.com.
wire the checks?
Available for hire.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I think that it's everyone always it's always worth a shot, but it's not going to be everybody's not going to be able to use humor because they don't have the time, the energy, sometimes it's so much red tape to get a piece of content done that they're just not going to find it worth their time. But I always think it's worth a shot. And don't be afraid to look outside of the people around the table at your office. You know, if you need to spend a few bucks and bring in a fresh writer, a comedian, somebody. Every town has comedians that have great ideas and can just break up the room a little bit with ideas and pitching. Um, you know, there's as much as the people in the room, you might be the funniest person in the room. It doesn't mean you're funny enough to write funny content.
Mm-hmm.
So don't be afraid to admit the fact that you aren't as funny as somebody else, and bring somebody else in, even just for a day, to just talk and brainstorm and shoot ideas around. It'll be worth its weight in gold in the long run.
So tell me about your podcast, Sweet Buddies. I've listened to quite a few of these, but podcasts are a different kind of room for comedians. It's obviously not a you know club with 50 people laughing in front of you, but at least your other buddies. What got you guys inspired to do a comedy podcast?
Well, we live together and we're comedians, and we
Yeah.
just figured it'd be fun to do. And we're actually reformatting it right now. So in the new year, it's going to be a brand new show um, called "We're Here to Help," and it's basically the idea is that each of us individually think we're better than the other ones, and we know how they need to change in order to have a better life. And so each week, the one person is challenged with something they have to do over the course of the next week to improve themselves based on what the other two think would make them a better person. And then if that person doesn't accomplish the goal, they have to do a punishment on the air. And then we take calls and emails
Yeah,
to give our
that's
stupid
great.
advice to people.
Mike, it's that time. Are you ready for the 5 most important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Let's party.
All right, I'm asking an Atlanta native, now New Yorker, Hartsfield Airport or LaGuardia?
Ooh, see, that's a tough one because LaGuardia is about to open their brand new
I
renovation.
know,
So
but it's got
right
potholes in the runway right now. So
Yeah, Hartsfield right now, but like who knows? Hartsfield's one of the best airports in the world, but LaGuardia, I like things that are new and shiny.
Wendy's Twitter feed or KFC's TV ads?
Wendy's Twitter feed. KFC's trying too hard. Although I will say this, KFC has also one of the best trolls I've ever seen in my life. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Um, are you familiar with that at all?
No, I'm not, but I but I want to know more.
So KFC is following the following people: Jerry Horner, Melanie Brown, Melanie C, Victoria Beckham, Herb Schreibner, Herb Wesson, Herb Waters, Herb Dean, Herb Sendek, and Herb Alpert. These are all famous or well-known people.
Yeah, yeah.
And for years, they were following 11 herbs and spices. Spice Girls.
Oh, nice.
And nobody caught him on it until I believe earlier this year. Somebody tweeted at him like, "Yo, are you following 11 herbs and spices?" And they sent this guy a giant painting of him riding the Colonel's back
Oh my
because
gosh.
the first person to find it, and I thought
That's
it was kind of
great.
Easter egg. But overall, Wendy's for sure.
All right, number 3, Yanni or Laurel?
Neither.
Thank you.
I think he was saying 666 over and over again, and we're all wired.
Oh god. All right, conference with 2,500 digital marketers cheering you on, or an intimate and smoke-filled comedy club with 50 drunk attendees.
Well, listen, I want to get hired at more conferences, so I'm going to lie and say marketing conferences.
Perfect. All right, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today, Atlanta natives should understand this: biscuits or cornbread? Tell me you don't miss Cracker Barrel's not being in Manhattan.
Well, I'll tell you right now. I'll tell you, in my opinion, Cracker Barrel is pure trash. But I also grew up in a food house. I worked in a lot of kitchens in my teens and 20s. I am not a fan of Cracker Barrel. I can show you. I'll tell you right now. Homegrown on Memorial Drive in Atlanta, their fluffy biscuit will put to bed any other biscuit or cornbread that I've ever had, hands down.
Nice. So, Mike, where can people find out more about you, find out where you're appearing at comedy clubs, the schedules, etc.?
My website is inmyownhead.com, and they can follow me at Big Man Mike on everything.
Big Man Mike, thank you so much for joining us on A Shark's Perspective today.
Thanks for having me, pal.
So there was my conversation with Mike Albanese, a stand-up comedian, an actor, and the MC and host of many of the Digital Summit marketing conferences throughout the country, and he's a subject matter expert at funny content. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from our conversation with him. First, do advertisements with comedy work? To some degree, it depends on your audience, the channel, and especially the timing. Know, though, that your brand may be starving, if you will, for some lightheartedness. As he said, assess your risk to the potential reward. It depends on how far you want to take it and how far you want to draw the line. And context is so vitally essential to content for any audience, even when your content has humor. Create your own position. That's so true. As he said, a funny idea without proper lines or context is going to fall on deaf ears. And remember that customers are just regular people that need to laugh a little bit too. Second, with social media, this is some great advice from Mike on lightening up and not being so dreadfully serious. Social media is a great channel to get away with a little bit more. Think about all those internet trolls and keyboard warriors that love to write nastygrams on your social channels. Then think about how brilliantly Wendy's perfected their Twitter responses and made them fun. He said, if you're clearly making a joke and if someone gets mad at you, then they look stupid. If you're not being mean to somebody, it's social media. So yes, you absolutely have to be serious to an extent. Customers and fans still want your information, but that doesn't mean it has to be normal brand babble all the time, focused more on your legal department than the customers themselves. It's okay to have a little bit of fun. Third, I loved his idea. Next time you're working on content, why not bring in a local comedian? It's got to be the right type of content to be considered funny, but your team and your agency may not be the best writers to make the content funny. As he said, you might be the funniest person in the room, but it doesn't mean you're funny enough to write funny content. So don't be afraid to admit the fact that you aren't as funny as somebody else, and bring somebody else in, even just for a day, to just talk and brainstorm and shoot ideas around. It will be worth its weight in gold in the long run. And I could not agree more, Mike. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. It's been my honor to spend this time with you in order to discuss another one of many components that makes up marketing today. Lighten up, laugh a little, do something funny, and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.